We'll see what ends up happening with it. We appreciate all the great super chats today. Well done by everybody. If you're in the chat right now, we appreciate you. Hit that like button. We're trying to get to 200 likes a day during the offseason. Can we do it? How close can we get? We appreciate all of you guys for being in here. Let's go to our man, BLG, Brandon Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation, joining us right now on Birds 365. BLG, welcome to the show, man. How you doing on this Wednesday morning?
Doing good, guys. How's it going?
Doing well. Sorry, getting a sip of coffee, trying to stay awake, BLG. But I don't want to talk about the Tush Bush, but we're just talking about it again. So we want to think of your process. My process, if you just heard, I think they should ban pushing in offensive football. Period. End of sentence. Has nothing to do with the Eagles. I felt that way for a while. I do believe it's a safety issue. If you think about Devontae in New Orleans, that type of play should not be in the game. The whistle should be blown. You shouldn't be waiting for a bunch of people to push a bunch of other people. I don't know why they put it in the game. If you frame it like that, do you have a problem with it versus what the NFL does and says, we want to ban a play that the Eagles used 47 times last year? Who gives a shit?
Yeah, I guess I think I saw, if I'm not mistaken, the reasoning about, I think it was actually Mark Murphy and his comments about that. In terms of why they got rid of that was because I guess they felt like it was too subjective at some level, or the refs wouldn't be able to necessarily always have the best view of that, and it would just be harder to legislate, I guess. But I mean, for me, the whole thing is like, how are we talking about this still? Like, this has been a topic.
I know.
As if it's like a new topic for multiple years now. It wasn't a topic last year when the Eagles were collapsing down the stretch, right? I don't remember it being as big of a topic when they were bad back then. So to say it has like nothing to do with being targeted at the Eagles is untrue. It absolutely is at some level.
Oh, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's a poor way to go about it. If you want it out, that's I agree with you. I think the Eagles are in people's heads, man, in more ways than one, whether it's Jeremy Fowler talk about trading for Myles Garrett or Howie's going to do this, Howie's going to do that. The Tush Bush, the Eagles are in people's heads. I agree with you 100% there.
I mean, even when they won the championship game against the 49ers, there was a whole, like, some teams have a really hard time taking a loss. Like the 49ers did. Like, we have to change the third quarterback rule. And, they did that. And then the Packers apparently, get beat by the Eagles twice this year. Like, well, we have to change the Tush Push, even though they did well with their own version of it, basically. And if whatever you want, it's silly. If you want to take out the pushing, fine. I think the Eagles will still be able to run it at a high rate. I also don't know, like, I'm curious what it means when people are saying ban. Like, what does that like fully look like? Like, how much are you banning? How exactly are you legislating that? I don't think people have specifically outlined that. You have, John, I think, with you're saying not pushing forward, but I don't know. I just think there's so much more interesting things to talk about, not from just this level, but like the national level, the national NFL discourse.
Yeah.
Well, no doubt about it. BLG, let's move on because I don't want to get caught up too much in it, but I appreciate your take on it. Howie Roseman spoke yesterday at the NFL Combines. A lot of different takes on what he said. Some people walked out of there or listened to that and took away, we're not bringing anybody back. We're going to have a whole new looking team. Some others with different lines of thinking. What was your takeaway from Howie Roseman's comments yesterday at the Combine?
Yeah, I think Howie clearly tempering expectations there, knowing, and I think the fans kind of know, a lot of these players won't be back. I don't think that means they're literally re-signing no one. I think it just means that, they're not going to be able to resign most of the players that they're going to be losing probably to free agency. And that, unlike last year where they were able to sign Saquon Barkley, sign Bryce Huff as well, obviously that didn't work out, but kind of make these bigger moves, and really right at the start of free agency, the legal tampering period, that day both of those moves were made. I think he's kind of tempering expectations a little bit, and really the framing of what he said too was like a line that he likes to use a lot, that free agency doesn't end the first week of free agency. It goes throughout the whole offseason. I think they're going to be cognizant of other players getting cut. That's going to be part of what they want to do this offseason. Obviously, as they play for the comp pick formula, they're going to have to be patient and maybe wait for some other players, some other teams to get cut to be able to add those kind of guys instead of just chasing top dollar on the free agent market.
He mentioned the word evolve a couple times, talked about evolution. And he mentioned not traditional, paraphrasing, obviously, off season. From texting with some of the guys that were there, he was a little bit better off podium than on podium, Howie. I kind of took it as the non-traditional part is they're going to pay an off-ball linebacker and they're not going to pay defensive front people. And I do think that Zach Ballin is the number one priority. I agree with that, but I want to play devil's advocate. They've had a lot of success, BLG, building the way they build and defaulting to offensive line, defensive front first. As great as Zach Ballin is that evolution or is that overreaction and going away from what has made you successful?
I think it's exception. I think Zach Ballin was an exceptional player in terms of how good he was and also in terms of how unique he was and how important he is, I think, to what the Eagles want to do, specifically with Vic Fangio in this defense and the different kind of roles he can play and the things he can do. I think that's unique. It's not as just like this is a good quality starting linebacker. This is a guy who is all pro, getting defensive player of the year votes. Like, you don't let that guy walk out the door. That's one you can make an exception for. Not to mention maybe leadership and everything too. And just, again, the state of the position when you really have nothing else there with Nakobe Dean hurt, with Oren Burks going to be a free agent and no other really proven players there. So I think it's just a unique circumstance where you make the exception for an exceptional player.
No doubt about it. BLG, what's your take on the White House thing that happened? A little bit of fake news going around, which is a fitting word to use, but it sounds like now the president is going to offer the invite to the Eagles. What did you make of just that whole situation and whether or not the Eagles should or should not go?
Yeah, the original report seemed kind of shoddy to me in terms of there was a quote in there about an Eagles minority owner speaking. That's when is someone from Eagles ownership that isn't Jeffrey Lurie ever spoken about any kind of team related move? No. So what's kind of dubious at first, and obviously it's evolved since then that the Eagles said they were willing to go, or at least they leaked that out to a lot of people. And President Trump apparently said that they're invited. We'll see, because I still think that everyone can say that now. Obviously, the players have a part in this. A lot of players might not want to go, and it's not like the Eagles, the team, can force them to go if they don't want to go. And that was the issue last time, where ultimately, basically, the Eagles were disinvited because not a lot of players were going to end up going down there, and didn't work out ultimately. So, just because everyone's saying that now doesn't mean it definitely will happen.
Yeah, I expect a bunch of players to not go.
Right.
Of course, that's where we are in the political environment. But just from the invitation standpoint, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't remember. The Eagles were going to go to the White House. They accepted. It's Doug Peterson, Nick Foles, a couple other people were going to go. And they were disinvited at the last minute. I was going down, I remember. And I'm like, well, now I'm not going down. It was the night before, I believe. They were sort of disinvited. So last time they were going to go as an organization, and I think something similar is going to happen this time. I don't know how many players are going to go, how many players aren't, but it's up to the player. Mm-hmm. And it should be. But they are going to get the invitation. They are going to accept the invitation as a franchise. And boy, we got to get back to a station in life, BLG, where everything isn't political. Sports team, championship, go celebrate it at the White House. Used to be a common thing. Nobody cared. Now it's everybody cares about everything. But that's that's another. We'll get it back to football. Myles Garrett. Jeremy Fowler came out with that sort of, boy, that doesn't strike me as Howie like BLG. Like waiting for somebody else. Like I'm going to get Myles Garrett because Washington's going to try. That doesn't seem like a smart GM move. That isn't Howie. Like, if he wants the guy, he's going to go after him. If not, he's not going to be worried about what the Washington Commanders do. Agree with that or disagree?
Yeah. I mean, Howie's going to have his plan. He's not going to let his plan be dictated by what the Commanders or another team is going to do. And yeah, I mean, as I've said before, I think Myles Garrett is that kind of player that, like, he's rare. He's a difference maker, and it's not simple because you're giving up significant assets to get him. But even what Howie talked about in terms of like a player who would be kind of worth those premium assets, I think Myles Garrett checks pretty much all those boxes. Maybe you could kind of quibble about age there, but I mean, I really don't think that's going to be an issue for him. And you see edge rushers, look no further than Brandon Graham, be able to play a little bit, longer than some other players do. Certainly, like, let's say cornerbacks, for example, for the most part, Darius Slay being the exception. So, I still very much think that's on the Eagles' radar. But, ultimately, I think if I have to say it's, more likely or less likely, I'm going to lead on the side of less likely.
It's a lot of picks and players though, BLG, for a 29-year-old guy. What point are you bowing out of that conversation?
I mean, but he's so good. He's like one of the best. Top 10, top 5. Like, we're talking about one of the very best players in the league here. And again, the way I've framed it in my mind is like I think he could be kind of like a Saquon level addition on defense, like just. Not that the Eagles defense wasn't great already, and not that he hasn't been great already. Obviously, he's been Defensive Player of the Year, but I just think putting him in this environment, he could be at a whole new level. Considering that the Browns aren't playing with leads, and he's not playing with the same kind of players he could be playing and coordinators that he, with all due respect to Jim Schwartz, that he could be playing here. At what point am I bowing out? I mean, I guess it would just have to be like a no-brainer. From the side of, okay, this is just obviously too much.
2 1s and no one?
I think that is too much in terms of what just precedent is. I think historical precedent, so obviously you have to pay him as well. And I don't think it should take that much. But if you're getting Myles Garrett.
The only reason I say that, and I brought that up as a potential, I'm just theorizing from Cleveland's standpoint, BLG. It's like if you lose an edge rusher, you might want an edge rusher back. They might want something else. But and then the Eagles' first-round picks, they're not like other people's first-round picks. It's not a top 15 pick. It's 32, and it's probably 27 to 32.
Sure.
We'll be conservative. Those aren't great picks. So I think that elevates it because the Eagles are too good. But from your standpoint, if somebody's giving up a top 15 pick, they're not giving up another first-round pick. There's a wide disparity to me with the Eagles pick versus maybe another team's first-round pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you brought up a name that we haven't talked about a lot. Should talk about it more, so I'm glad you brought it up. Darius Slay. That's a difficult one for me. You got to do something with his contract. He's got no guaranteed money. He's got a big cap number. He's going to be 35 on New Year's when the Eagles are in the playoffs next year, and they probably will be. We know the history of corners at that age. Amazing player. We lost Zander for a second. There he is. Pop back up. But what do you do with Darius Slay?
I think it's tough to bring him back. I know he's a team captain. Players like him and everything, but like you said, John, going to be 35. Like that's the history of cornerbacks aging, as we've seen with James Bradbury, and clearly, Slay has been able to make it beyond that point. But that's just a risky thing to bet on, I think. And we saw it this year. Even I think Slay had a great season, but he was in and out of the lineup in a lot of these games. Nagging injuries, not something that caused him to miss super long stretches, but certainly wasn't able to play 100% of the snaps in and out each week. So, and also like you have Quinyon Mitchell, you have Keely Ringo. I don't want to move Cooper DeJean outside, but he's part of the equation as well. You can keep Isaiah Rodgers maybe if you don't keep Darius Slay. Like that's a nice, younger group of cornerbacks to kind of move forward with. And I feel like if Howie's going to be talking about learning from sentimentality and needing to make tough decisions, I think like moving on from Slay is one of those decisions.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one there to move. I don't know. Do you think Cooper DeJean moves out, BLG?
No, I just think they had too much success with him in that role, and they basically were playing like almost full nickel to have him on the field. and that worked too well. And, look, I think Keely Ringo, he obviously played a little bit at the end of his rookie season, showed some things. I thought he had a mostly good training camp last year. Obviously, he didn't win the job, but there was stiff competition there. And again, Isaiah Rodgers might be a factor if you're not bringing Slay. So I think between all of what you have there, between obviously Quinyon Mitchell starting at one spot and then either Rodgers or Ringo at the other spot, I think you're cooking with gas in that setup.
With Cooper, I think that's a perfect example of what makes Howie Roseman's job so difficult. In the standpoint of, from a football aspect, we all look at it like he's the best nickel corner in football. Let's keep him there. Business-wise, nickel corners don't get paid like outside corners. And the Eagles they scouted Cooper DeJean as an outside corner. They believe he can play outside corner. Does the business aspect come into it at some point? And, his agent's going to be, this guy, one of the best defensive backs in football, but he's not going to get paid like it unless he plays outside. Is that an issue? Maybe not this year, but down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to bring up for down the road, like you said. But even so, I think the Eagles would be willing to pay him, like an outside cornerback. And also, who knows? And maybe he does end up there. I wouldn't think as plan A, but injuries or something, other players struggle, then you might try to do that and see how that goes there. But for now, yeah, I just think I'm trying to keep him. I think Vic Fangio is probably wanting to keep him in the nickel as much as they can.
Yeah, no doubt about it. BLG draft coming up. Combine starts tomorrow. I think we're 57 days away from the NFL draft. As it stands there, the Eagles pick at 32. Let's just live in reality for a second. Who do you like at 32? And if you don't like, if you're not ready to give me a player, that's fine.
Yeah.
But a position group. Where do you feel like the Eagles are leaning position group wise with that with those first couple picks?
Yeah, definitely not ready to give you a name just because I can't believe we're already here.
I know, man. It's ridiculous.
It's so fast.
I'm with you. I'm like, I'm trying to catch up. Boy, I'm way behind.
Yeah.
I was like, we're not behind. I'm behind, Howie.
Yeah, way behind. I think based on, all the mock drafts I'm seeing and what has been said about this class by, people I really respect when it comes to the draft community, it's defensive line. Like that is kind of what seems like the sweet spot could be there at pick 32, assuming the Eagles even stay at pick 32. Right. Obviously, they didn't last time when they were picking 32, when they traded down and the Ravens selected Lamar Jackson there. I think it's either edge rusher, as you guys were talking about, even before I get on John, you were saying, the Eagles aren't going into this season with Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith as their starting edge rushers. And even if they were, you still need depth behind them because you don't really have anybody right now. Bryce Huff, okay. Who knows even, if Vic Fangio trusts him to play. We'll see about BG if he comes back or not. And Josh Sweat, I think it's good it's gone. So, they need to really add more talent there. I think edge rusher will be good value. And also defensive tackle. You're losing Milton Williams, again, likely, I think. Then I think the sweet spot for that kind of value there, you should be able to get an interior defender who can be part of that rotation that you have in there and help you out immediately, and then also kind of ideally develop into more of a starter down the road.
I think you just mentioned Josh Sweat as good as gone. I think we're all at that point. Why are we at that point? Like, what has Josh Sweat done that he's not valued at the point that the Eagles typically value defensive front players? Because this has been a good player for a long time. Maybe he doesn't have the Hassan Reddick sack numbers of 2022, but this has been a really good two-way defensive end for a really long time. What is it? Just the knee? Is it going all the way back to high school? What is it about Josh Sweat that hasn't resonated with this franchise?
Yeah, not even really just the Eagles. I think if you want to play devil's advocate and say, like, maybe his market will be a little softer than people expect it would be, because like last year when the Eagles, gave him a chance to kind of seek a trade, and then ultimately he had to take a pay cut. Clearly other teams weren't saying, oh, we have to have Josh Sweat. We need that guy. And for good reason at the time, because he was coming off of that extremely cold stretch to end the 2023 season. And even as Zander has pointed out in the show here before, also had a pretty like cold stretch later this year, obviously before the Super Bowl, where he lit the world on fire in that game. And that's certainly extremely relevant and I think could hugely factor into his market increasing. People, I think, will be, we'll put more weight on that performance considering the whole world saw it. So ultimately, I just think this has been a divorce in the making for a year now, with Josh Sweat taking a pay cut. Like, I don't think there's any chance that Josh Sweat is like, taking any kind of discount to come back to the Eagles. I think he's going pretty much wherever the top dollar is, and I just don't think the Eagles will be offering that top dollar.
It does feel weird, BLJ, when you think about these free agents and you're like, they're going to sign the linebacker and they're going to let the 2 defensive linemen walk. Like, that sounds like we live in an alternate reality when you're talking about the Eagles, if that's true. But I'm with you. I don't feel like Sweat's coming back, and I think Milton Williams is going to get paid too much money. But it does feel weird that the Eagles are, presumably going to pay a linebacker and not the defensive lineman. I don't know. It feels far-fetched, but could be the reality that comes March 12th.
Yeah, that's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, it is strange from the traditional roster building. That's why I kind of brought that up before, because you can make an argument that it has served the Eagles well and to go away from it. But I advocated too. Zach Bond was just too good this year. He was too good. I mean, and it was consistently good.
Yeah.
To get a splash play one week and then he falls off. He was consistently good from week 1 in Brazil through the Super Bowl in New Orleans. Amazing season for Zach Bond. If there's one player that deserves it, that should be an outlier, I think it is Zach Bond. But I'm like, boy, Milton Williams specifically, that's exactly the player the Eagles pay. That is exactly age. He hasn't played a ton. There's not a ton of tread off the tire because early in his career as a backup, explodes in his season. Howie kind of talked about the extensions. He did this in the Super Bowl season as well. It's hard. He said it's hard to extend guys because you don't want to upset the apple cart. If you say, all right, this guy we should extend, this guy we're not going to extend, you're having a special season. Maybe you don't want to create waves in that estimate. So I get it from that standpoint. But everything about Milton Williams, they drafted him. Howie was the one who advocated for him. Tom Donahoe is the one who wanted Lim McNeil. This is the guy they should bring back. And I don't get any sense they're bringing back Milton Williams. Is that any kind of surprise to you?
I guess part of the thing here, quickly on Bond first. I mean, like, it is funny to think that was his first season. So, like, he could maybe be better. At least, he'll have more experience. He'll certainly not be learning like he was last year.
I'm not going to bet on that, but you're right. Yeah.
Not better from a standpoint of, like, hard for him to, like, accomplish more than he did this year. But he, in theory, having more reps and everything, could be more experienced at it. But, with Milton Williams, I mean, I just think, like, the writing is on the wall that the Eagles let him get to this point, right? Like, how many young players, like, they do this with, John? Like, how they don't let these guys get to the market and then sign them. Like, that's not their formula. The formula is always sign them 1 year early.
Yeah. But if you want to bet on yourself,
because you, in theory, get that discount.
If you want to bet on yourself to play that, and I think Milton did. He bet on himself.
Right.
Yeah.
He did. And I just think I think I want to be very, like, careful about this because I think Milton Williams deserves the contract he's going to get, probably from another team in free agency. I'm really not trying to disparage him. I just think, like, when you're talking about $20 million, which who knows, might get up to that for a guy who had half of a sack in 2023, like, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy money to me. I think he is a good player, but I think he's ultimately going to get overpaid. And that's what free agency is. It's not unique to him. And good for him. I think he deserves, again, all the money he gets. But if I'm the Eagles and I have limited resources, I'm not trying to be that team that's going to overpay for a guy where, again, loaded draft class. Also, not to say that literally anyone can excel playing next to Jalen Carter, but I think a lot of players can have success playing next to Jalen Carter.
Good point.
And I think that's a big reason why Milton took off this year too, is because he played next to a dominant defensive line. And that's the thing. If you have Jalen Carter and he's as awesome as he is, you shouldn't have to pay another defensive tackle like top of the market money. Like, that's the luxury of having Jalen Carter.
It's a good take by you because look, he's been an exceptional third-round draft pick, a great player for a third rounder. But now you're talking about $20 million. I don't know if he's worth that. I think he's going to get that, but I don't know if for the Eagles he is worth that money. And remember, he also had an All-Pro linebacker behind him. He had a really good secondary as well. So everything was good around him. It's a good point by you, BLJ. I don't know if he's worth the $20 million plus. Might be a little bit of a letdown on his next team. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll tell you from my perspective, and I love Milton personally. I think he's a great guy. I agree with you. He's going to get overpaid, and he's probably going to be a disappointment. He's probably going to be back on the market in 2 years. But at the same time, I'm like, boy, for the Eagles and the way they typically do business, this is a guy that I would have said 99 times out of 100, they're going to find a way to bring him back. So I'm kind of torn on. That's the one I'm torn on because I think he's a really good player. But to your point, BLG, I mean, yeah, Jalen Carter is going to make maybe Moro Ojomo look like Milton Williams next year. He's that good. So I get it from the Eagles standpoint, and that's why I'm torn on this one. And that's why some of these decisions are difficult. It's not difficult to decide to get Brandon Gowton on this show at Brandon Gowton on X. Make sure you follow him there, bleedinggreennation.com. Read him there, and his staff do a tremendous job. I wanted to bring up Jason Peters. I haven't brought up Jason Peters. I meant to. 2 decades, basically, in the NFL. Now, he hung around too long. If you talk to people in the Eagles, this is a no doubt about it Hall of Fame player. Lane Johnson still talks about him today. Jordan Mailata is just with reverence. In his prime, he was the best left tackle in football. But I feel like because he hung around so long, he kind of hurt himself a little bit when it comes to that, Canton level. We lost BLG.
We lost BLG. Let me see if I can get him back.
I wanted to get his take on it. But I did want to mention Jason Peters because he officially retired. He's going to work in the Seattle front office with some of their players as sort of a mentor. But I don't know how much you heard there, BLG. But to me, this is a Hall of Fame player. To everybody in Philadelphia, this is a Hall of Fame player. Did he hurt himself too much by sticking around too long?
I don't think from a Hall of Fame standpoint. I do think, from a fan perception and legacy kind of standpoint, I think a lot of people think of the end years, he's there again, he's in and out of the lineup. But I mean, I think that's tough because he was such an amazing, dominant player. I think one of the most unique things I can say about Jason Peters, or one of the unique experiences I had, was just I remember one day he was walking back from the practice field to training camp. He walked immediately by me, and as you know, John, I'm a tall person. I'm 6'9". I'm not a small person, but Jason Peters, who's I'm taller than, but he made me feel small. He made me feel just how massive he is and how strong he is. He could just take me and rip me in half. That's just a unique. He's just a unique player for how big and strong and massive he was, but also then. I saw some people tweeting out highlights of his career on Twitter today, and just how his movement ability, how he's so big, he's able to move so well and so fluid.
Yeah, it was a tight end at Arkansas. People forget, and then he just, the size and the athleticism, the size and the strength and the athleticism, really tough to duplicate. One of the good things, Howie spoke about him at the end. He called him that's my favorite Jason Peters story. So I'll give you that. He's a world champion. I'm glad he called him a world champion. I used to say this about Carson Wentz. There was when the Eagles came back after winning Super Bowl 52. One of the sort of at training camp, you were probably there that day. One of the sort of outstate reporters, I don't know if it was Allentown, but one of the guys who aren't there all the time, asked Jason Peters if he liked to go back to the Super Bowl to become a world champion himself or a Super Bowl champion himself. And Jason basically looked at him in that Jason Peters intimidating look, and he was like, already got one.
Yeah.
the ring, world championship, or whatever he wanted. Just said already got. I always thought if Carson Wentz took that approach, because Jason Peters was such a big part of that team, but he didn't play. Halapulibate, he got hurt. He was one of the guys who got hurt. Carson Wentz did not handle it that way. And Jason, I'll always remember him saying, already got one. And that death stare that he had. And he did. He already got one. He was a big, big part of that team. Phenomenal player. I've never heard Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, Jordan Mailata, they talk about him with reverence to this day.
And I don't know if you mentioned it in there, but like he was a good leader too, in terms of he'd be out there after practice helping young guys who had probably maybe even had no chance of making the team. Like he really cared, and and not players don't have to do that, especially a player like him. And not even just his own position group, like young offensive tackles, but like young defensive linemen too, and trying to get them better. So, I think Jason Peters was a huge part of this organization, not just as a player, but as a whole, as a figure, as a presence. Obviously, people remember, Nick Foles and Jason Peters getting in the face of Chris Baker after that. Like that stuff matters. Like he was a leader, and obviously it wasn't a great decision in the terms of he hurt his team by, getting ejected, but like ultimately what he stood for and that attitude and that mentality, a lot of the success, I know the Eagles didn't ultimately, they did win the Super Bowl, but a lot of the in other years, like he was a huge part of why they were good at all. Like in 2013, when Chip comes in, like he's a big part of that. He was an amazing
and Jake
Hall of
Elliott
Fame player.
I should mention Jake Elliott.
Yeah,
when Jake got here.
That's right. No more misses.
No more misses. And Jake took that advice to heart. No more misses.
If Jason Peters tells you not to miss a kick, I think that is good motivation.
Yeah, good stuff there. BLG, thanks for joining in today, brother. We appreciate it. Make sure you guys follow BLG at Brandon Gowton and read all his work at Bleeding Green Nation, one of the best in the business. BLG, thank you, brother. We appreciate it.
See you guys.
Thanks, man.
There's Brandon Lee Gowton joining us on Birds 365. Johnny Mac, great show today, my man. We got 5 minutes left. I got a couple of super chats to read, but just your final thoughts there on what BLG had to say today on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to Jason. No more misses. Already got one. Those are my two biggest remembrances. And just the way I remember when Brandon Brooks retired, just the way he talked about him. Lane still today, he tweeted, loves him. Jordan Mailata, coming from where he came from, not knowing how to play, not knowing how to put on his helmet. Those guys still talk about him like he's almost a mythical figure. And that tells you a lot about a player.
No doubt about it. Let's get to a couple super chats and we'll read them off there. JD3, what's up, brother? Again, appreciate all your support today. He says, how is pushing only a safety concern for one side of the ball? If the defense pushes, is that a safety?
No, I didn't say it was a safety concern for one side of the ball. Safety concern for all sides of the ball. Safety concerns because everybody's on the field going these extra seconds and extra instead of blowing the play dead. That's why I brought up Devontae. Now, that was an offensive player. Could have been the defensive player getting hurt. It's a safety issue because it's a safety issue. Not for one side of the ball.
It is inching us closer to two-hand touch, though, isn't it, John?
Well, if from the safety, I always talk about the hypocrisy of the NFL, because when people talk about safety, and this is not just the league, when they talk about safety, they're talking about concussions. That's it. Like nobody cares that Nolan Smith tore his triceps or Cam Jurgens hurt his spine or Landon Dickerson's got to get knee surgery.
Which, by the way, I'm a little worried about that Cam Jurgens.
Yeah. So, people talk about it. So there's the hypocrisy aspect of it from that standpoint. But I'm talking about how the league does business. And the league does business based on legal indemnity, let's be honest. And this is a play when you push and you let the play be extended, that becomes a safety concern. I think if Sean McDermott's in charge, and again, number one is spelled out P-yes. Number two is Buffalo. So you can't look at Sean McDermott and say, in theory, he's hurting his team because they're really good at it as well. And he says it's a safety issue. Now, not the tush push specifically, pushing in general. And that's who I agree with. And eventually it's going to be out of the game. Now, I don't think it's going to be out of the game until they rebrand it in that fashion. I don't think the league is going to ban the play because it looks like they're penalizing one team. But I do think they're eventually going to ban pushing, just like they banned pulling. And it used to be not part of the game and nobody cared. Nobody realized because it wasn't part of the game before 2005. So it's not like they haven't done it in the past. I think now it's getting to the point where enough people agree and the legal indemnity is going to factor into it. And eventually it's going to go. So, and by the way, for Eagles fans, because that's the majority of people we're talking to every day, it's not going to matter to the Eagles. The Eagles are going to be really successful with the quarterback sneak.
I agree. We'll see what ends up happening with the tush push. Brian Pumper checks in. That Devontae play was no aiding the ball carrier. He was being held up by a bigger player for a defender to launch into him. Watch the tape.
Yeah, that's fine. And I just bring up, but there's examples over when you're holding up players, whether it's a defensive guy holding them up, whether it's an offensive guy holding up, and they're not blowing the play dead because they think there's a chance that maybe somebody from one side or the other side is going to do something, and it creates a safety issue, and that's the bigger point. And that's why I talk about banning pushing as a whole, no matter where it is. It doesn't have to be on a quarterback sneak. It could be at the goal line, could be a running game where everybody gets behind the running back. Ban it completely the way it was banned before 2005. Did people not realize it was not in the league until 2005? Like, I don't know why they brought it back. It has created, as most things do, unintended consequences. The fact that the Eagles took advantage of the rule,
that's my problem with it.
Is not. That's what the Eagles should do.
Right, but that's what the league wouldn't even be responding if the Eagles weren't successful at this.
That's true, but like with Bill Belichick and the formational tricks and lining up the tight end inside, nobody thought of it.
Right.
Until the Patriots thought it. And then they changed it right away because they said, oh, this is a fucking loophole. Cursing. This is a loophole. We got to get it. We got to close it. That's what's happening here. The Eagles took advantage of the rule. I'm an old school baseball guy. You go back to Billy Martin and the Pine Tar game. I don't know if you know that, but it's this famous game where George Brett hit a home run. Billy Martin was such a baseball wizard. He knew the rules back and forward. He saw the pine tar on the bat was higher than it should be. Stupid rule, has nothing to do with the game, had nothing to do with George Brett hitting a home run. But Billy Martin said, in the moment, I got an advantage here. I'm going to go out and say, this is against the rules. And he was right. He was 100%. They waved it off. They called George Brett out. The Royals, the Kansas City Royals at the time, they said, this is not in the spirit of the rule of the game. They're 100% right, and they changed it. They should have changed it. Stupid. Formational change, they should have changed it with Bill Belichick. Stupid. It was a loophole. They closed it. This is not good for the game. They will take it out, but they have to brand it the right way. Interesting.
That's a good baseball story right there, too, on the pine tar. I got to look that up. Great stuff there. We appreciate everybody checking in today. Johnny Mac, little overtime. Just your final thoughts, man. Howie spoke yesterday. Nick spoke yesterday. We're 1 day away from the NFL Combine. I don't know exactly what we are. I want to say we're, 14, 15 days away from free agency beginning and then 57 days away from the NFL Draft. So moving right along, Johnny Mac. I got some draft work to do this week and back in the studio, brother.
Yeah, a lot of draft work is BLG. We're behind. Howie says he's not behind.
Howie's got a team of 60 people.
Yeah, well, that's true. Howie's got a bigger support staff than I do. But, yeah, they're behind, too. Don't kid yourself. But you'd rather be behind because you won the Super Bowl than the opposite. Right. So no issues there.
Yep, no doubt about it. Good show today. We appreciate everybody checking in today. Can't do any Zander time today. All right, I got to get out of here. I got some work to finish up after returning home. So we appreciate all of you guys. Johnny Mac, great show. Appreciate everybody. Hit that like button, and we'll see you tomorrow on Birds 365.